I never should have come here, my daughter-in-law spat, throwing my dinner on the floor. Her words echoed in my mind, each one like a slap across my face. How did we get to this point? The restaurant was quiet, the hum of conversation around us completely at odds with the storm brewing at our table. I watched as she stood there, her face twisted with disgust, her eyes cold and sharp as knives. My heart raced, and my breath caught in my throat. I had thought tonight would be different. I thought this dinner would bring us closer, but it only highlighted the growing distance between us. The shock of it all left me frozen for a moment, not knowing whether to cry, scream, or just leave. I had been the one to care for this family, the one who had always tried to bring us together. But now, here I was, humiliated in front of strangers. My hands trembled as I tried to steady myself, but I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. What had I done to deserve this? Had I failed her? My son, the one person who I thought would stand up for me, sat there, silent. His eyes were fixed on his wife, not meeting mine. The weight of the moment crushed me, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. What could I say? There was nothing left to say. My daughter-in-law's laughter, cold and mocking, filled the space around us. You never should have shown up, she repeated, her voice dripping with venom. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, but I stayed still, my hands clenched at my sides. There was nothing I could do but endure this. I had raised my son with love, and yet here I was, the target of this cruelty. The room seemed to blur around me as I tried to find my voice. But instead, I simply nodded, a silent agreement to the reality that had become my life. This wasn't the family I had imagined. This wasn't the respect I had earned. All I wanted was a simple meal, a chance to sit down with my loved ones. But instead, I had been made to feel like an outsider, as though I didn't belong in my own family anymore. I wanted to leave, but I stayed. For him. I didn't want to create more drama. Even though I knew the damage had already been done. This wasn't about food. This was about something much deeper. A fracture in our family that had been building for years. And tonight, it finally broke. I'm sorry, Eleanor, my son whispered, his voice barely audible, but the words stung like salt in an open wound. Sorry. Was that supposed to make it better? Was that supposed to undo everything that had been said and done? I glanced at Charlotte one last time, her expression unreadable. I could feel the years of resentment boiling beneath the surface. But I didn't say anything. I just stood up, wiped my hands on my napkin, and walked out. I didn't look back. As I stepped out of the restaurant, the cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time that night, I felt something. Anything. Other than the suffocating weight of the table and the silence that had followed my exit. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. I walked out of the restaurant that night, my mind racing, my body numb. The cool air felt sharp against my skin as I made my way down the quiet street. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I had thought that, despite everything, my son and daughter-in-law still cared about me. I had hoped that, after all the years, I had earned that much. But tonight, everything had changed. I had been thrown away like a piece of trash. And for what? Because I had shown up at a family dinner? Because I had dared to exist in their world? I didn't know how long I had been walking, but eventually, I found myself standing in front of a small park. The swing set creaked gently in the breeze, a sound that should have been comforting, but instead, it only reminded me of the emptiness I felt inside. I sat on the bench, staring at the ground, trying to make sense of what had happened. The hurt was overwhelming. My thoughts kept racing back to the moment when Charlotte had snapped at me, her words cutting through the air like a knife. You never should have shown up, she had said, her face contorted with anger. I replayed the scene over and over in my mind, trying to figure out what I had done to deserve such treatment. Was it because I had been a burden to them? Was it because they had been waiting for the chance to get rid of me? My mind refused to quiet down, but the truth was clear. This wasn't about the dinner. This wasn't about the food. This was about power. Charlotte had always been cold toward me, but tonight, she had shown her true colors. She had never seen me as family, just someone she had to tolerate. And my son? My son had sat there, silent, as though he had already chosen a side. I didn't know what hurt more, his silence or Charlotte's cruelty. I had spent my entire life putting my family first, always making sure they had everything they needed. I had been there for them, supporting them through thick and thin. But in the end, it seemed that none of that mattered. I was just an inconvenience to them, a relic from the past they were eager to discard. I stood up from the bench, wiping away the tear that had silently slipped down my cheek. I wouldn't let them see me break. Not now, not ever. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. I had to be strong. I walked back home, my steps steady, even though my heart was heavy. When I arrived, I stood at the door for a moment, looking at the house that had once felt like a home. But now, it felt like a place I didn't belong. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. I walked through the empty hallways, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The house felt like it was closing in on me. I went into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, hoping to find something familiar, something that would ground me. But nothing. The food, the dishes, the everyday things that once made this place feel like home, now felt meaningless. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands resting on the cool surface. I had never felt so alone in my life. I had always believed that family was the most important thing, that we were supposed to be there for each other no matter what. But tonight, I realized that wasn't true. Not for them. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The world seemed so different now. The sky was dark, and the streetlights flickered in the distance. It was as if everything had changed in that moment, and I didn't know how to fix it. I had always thought that, in the end, love would prevail. But now I wasn't so sure. The love I had for my family, the sacrifices I had made, they all seemed so small compared to the coldness I was facing. I couldn't help but wonder if I had been wrong all along. Was family really worth everything? Or had I given too much? I spent the next few days in a haze, not knowing what to do or where to turn. The silence in the house was deafening. I had always believed that the bonds of family were unbreakable, that no matter what, we would always have each other. But now, everything felt so fragile. I couldn't escape the feeling that something inside me had shattered. The anger, the hurt, they were there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was the silence that was killing me. The emptiness. I kept thinking about what happened at the restaurant, replaying every word, every movement in my mind. You never should have shown up. Those words echoed in my head over and over again. Charlotte's face had been full of disdain, as if I was the one who had wronged her. It was hard to wrap my mind around it. She had always been distant, always cold, but this felt like something more. She had humiliated me in front of strangers, treated me like I was nothing. And my son, the one person I thought would stand by me, just sat there, silent. I didn't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, my family had stopped feeling like family. It was as if they had moved on without me. It was as if they had made their decision, and I wasn't part of it. I had always put them first, always made sure they had everything they needed, but now, it felt like I was nothing more than a burden to them. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was no longer wanted. I wasn't needed. I wasn't even seen. I tried to reach out to my son, but he avoided my calls. I tried to talk to him, to make sense of everything, but each time, he was too busy or too distracted. I couldn't even get a straight answer from him. It was as if he was too afraid to face the truth. Charlotte had been the one to change him. She had turned him against me, twisted him into someone I didn't recognize. I had always believed that a mother's love could never be replaced, but now, I wasn't so sure. I started to question everything. Had I done something wrong? Had I missed the signs? The guilt weighed heavily on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been blindsided by something far deeper than I had realized. It wasn't just Charlotte's words or her actions. It was the way my son had turned his back on me. It was the way he had let her dictate everything. I couldn't understand why he would choose her over me. After everything we had been through, the years of love, the sacrifices, the memories we had shared, they meant nothing to him now. The thought of it made my chest ache. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit here and let this happen. I had to take control. But how? What could I do to make them see? The anger swelled inside me. But this time, it wasn't just the anger of being wronged. It was the anger of a mother who had been betrayed by her own child. I had always put family first, but now, I knew I had to put myself first. I had to fight for my own peace, for my own dignity. The next morning, I made a decision. I was done being the one who was always pushed aside, the one who was always overlooked. I was done being treated like I didn't matter. I didn't know what my next steps would be, but I knew I wasn't going to let them get away with this. It was time to stand up for myself. I woke up the next morning feeling a strange sense of clarity. The night had been long, filled with restless thoughts, but somewhere between the darkness and the rising sun, I had made a decision. I couldn't let what happened at that restaurant be the final chapter. I couldn't let Charlotte's cruel words or my son's silence define me. I had spent too many years as a mother, as a woman, to be dismissed so easily. I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the woman staring back at me. I didn't recognize her, not anymore. She seemed older, worn, but there was something else in her eyes. A fire, a quiet strength, a resolve that I hadn't seen in years. It was time to stop pretending. It was time to stop trying to please everyone. I had done my part. I had given everything I had to this family, and what did I have to show for it? Betrayal, rejection, and the coldness of people who should have loved me. I wasn't going to let them take my peace any longer. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. The conversation was brief, but it was enough. I had to protect myself. I had to make sure that what was mine stayed mine, and that the years of sacrifice I had given to this family weren't thrown away like the dinner at that restaurant. The lawyer assured me that we could begin the process, that I had legal rights. But even as he spoke, I knew this wasn't just about legal rights. It was about dignity. It was about standing up for myself, about showing them that I wasn't just a pawn in their game. I didn't want their money, their house, or their empty promises. I wanted respect. I wanted recognition. I wanted my son back, but not the one who had been brainwashed by his wife. I wanted the son I had raised, the son who had once called me his best friend. But I knew that was a fantasy. The damage had been done, and it was too late for that. As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was finally doing something for myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to cry over what had been lost. I had my life ahead of me, and I was going to take it back. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings with my lawyer. It was exhausting, but necessary. I couldn't sit back and let Charlotte and my son ruin my life. I had spent my life taking care of them, but now it was my turn to take care of me. The hardest part was seeing my son's face, knowing that he was the one who had turned against me. But I couldn't let that stop me. I couldn't let my love for him blind me to the truth. He was no longer the person I had raised. He was someone else now, someone I didn't recognize, and it hurt more than anything. But I couldn't let the hurt define me. I had to move forward, even if it meant leaving him behind. I had spent too many years putting others first. It was time to put myself first. I was done being the quiet, forgiving mother. I was done accepting the scraps they threw my way. I was done being invisible. I spent the following days trying to come to terms with the reality of what had happened. The decision I had made to take control of my life didn't feel like a triumph yet. It felt like survival. I could still hear my son's voice in my head, the apologetic tone, the way he had tried to justify his actions. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that those words didn't matter. What mattered was what I was going to do next. I wasn't going to beg for his love. I wasn't going to beg for respect. I had spent years doing that, and it had gotten me nowhere. The silence in the house was oppressive, but I had learned to embrace it. It was a silence that came with a sense of freedom, a freedom that I had longed for, but never truly understood until now. As the days passed, I began to see things differently. I started to see myself as more than just a mother, more than just someone who had been pushed to the sidelines. I was a woman, strong and capable, and I was reclaiming my life. I met with my lawyer again, and we began the process of securing what was rightfully mine. It wasn't just about the money or the house. It was about standing up for myself. I had sacrificed too much, given too much, and it was time to stop. I didn't care about Charlotte's manipulations or my son's apathy. I cared about my own peace. One afternoon, I received a call from a familiar voice. It was Harold, an old friend of the family. He had always been there for me, even when things seemed impossible. He asked me if I wanted to meet, and I agreed. When we sat down together at a quiet cafe, I could see the concern in his eyes. "Eleanor," he began softly, "I know this has been hard for you, but I want you to know something." He paused, as if he was choosing his words carefully. "Your son is not the person you think he is right now. He's lost himself, and it's not just because of Charlotte." His words hung in the air. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had always known that my son had changed, but hearing someone else say it made it feel so real. I nodded, trying to mask the pain. "He's my son, Harold," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I raised him. I loved him, and I thought that would be enough." Harold's expression softened. "I know, Eleanor. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes, People change in ways we can't control. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had spent years caring for everyone else. Now, those same hands were the ones I had to rely on to build a new life. The conversation with Harold left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, it was comforting to hear that I wasn't alone in this. On the other hand, it hurt to realize that my son was so lost. But as I sat there, I also felt something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't a hope that he would change or that things would go back to the way they were. It was a hope for myself, a hope that I could rebuild my life, no matter what. As I walked home that evening, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had taken the first step, and while the road ahead was uncertain, I was no longer afraid to walk it. I was ready to face whatever came next, because I knew that this time, I was doing it for me. I spent the next few days trying to find some semblance of normalcy, but it wasn't easy. The house was quiet, far too quiet, and I couldn't escape the feeling of being alone in a place I had once called home. I had made the decision to reclaim my life, but the process wasn't as simple as I had hoped. Each step forward felt heavy, as though the weight of the past was holding me back. My phone stayed silent for the most part, except for a few calls from my lawyer. My son had not reached out, and Charlotte, well, she was nowhere to be found. The silence from them was deafening, but at the same time, it allowed me space to think, space to breathe, space to heal. I had spent my entire life making sure everyone else was taken care of, but now it was my turn. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but because I knew I had to set an example. I was a mother, yes, but I was also a woman who had dreams, who had a life beyond the roles they had tried to impose on me. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to live that life. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them regret their actions. It was about finding my peace, about building a future that didn't rely on anyone else's approval or acceptance. I had been betrayed, yes. I had been hurt in ways I never thought possible. But I wasn't going to let that define me. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be moments of doubt, times when the loneliness would creep in, but I also knew that I had the strength to carry on. I spent my days going through my belongings, sorting through memories, and letting go of things that no longer served me. I found an old photo album one afternoon, filled with pictures of my son when he was just a boy. I could still remember those moments so clearly. The way his eyes would light up when he saw me after school, the way he would crawl into my lap and tell me about his day. I wanted to cry, to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I put the album back on the shelf. I didn't need to relive those moments. I didn't need to hold on to the past to move forward. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself growing stronger. I was no longer the woman who sat in silence, waiting for someone else to save her. I was the woman who had saved herself. I started making plans. I looked into moving to a new place, one that was mine and mine alone. I didn't need a mansion or anything extravagant. I just needed a space where I could breathe, where I could be free. The thought of it excited me. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Real hope. Not the kind of hope that was tied to someone else's actions, but the kind that came from within. The kind that said, "You are enough, just as you are." I hadn't heard from my son, and I had stopped trying to reach out. There was nothing more to say. I had done my part. I had loved him unconditionally, but love wasn't enough to keep him in my life when he had chosen to turn his back on me. I wasn't going to chase after someone who didn't want to be found. It wasn't easy, but I was done. The silence that had once weighed so heavily on me now felt like freedom. I knew there would be more challenges ahead. Life wasn't going to be perfect, and my heart still ached at the thought of what could have been. But I was finally starting to see that I was stronger than I had ever realized. And that was enough for me. I spent the following weeks continuing to rebuild my life, piece by piece. I found myself becoming more comfortable with the silence that had once overwhelmed me. It was no longer something to fear, but something I had come to appreciate. The house was still the same, but everything felt different now. I had started focusing on what I needed, not what others wanted from me. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to find a new rhythm. I kept myself busy, working on the house, planning my next steps. I even started doing small things for myself, things I had forgotten about over the years. I started painting again, a hobby I had once loved but had put aside in the chaos of family life. Each brushstroke helped me clear my mind, and I began to feel like I was reclaiming a part of myself that I had lost. I was finding my own way again. Then one afternoon, as I was in the middle of painting a canvas in the living room, I heard the doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I went to answer it anyway. Standing on my doorstep was my son. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly masked the surprise. I hadn't seen him in weeks. He looked different, tired, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched out between us, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the silence of rejection, but one of uncertainty. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the room before sitting down on the couch. I sat across from him, waiting. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew this conversation was inevitable. "I know I've been distant," he started, avoiding my gaze. "And I know you've been hurt." His words were slow, almost hesitant. "I don't even know where to begin. But I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you." I sat there, processing his words. I had waited for this moment, but now that it was here, I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to jump up and embrace him, to tell him that everything was okay. But another part of me, the part that had been betrayed, wanted to stay silent and let him explain. I took a deep breath. "You've hurt me, Wade," I said quietly. "But it's not just about what happened with Charlotte. It's about you choosing her over me. It's about you turning your back on everything I've done for you." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with guilt. I could see the regret in his expression, but it didn't change what had happened. It didn't change the fact that I had been pushed aside. "I don't know why I let it get this far," he said, his voice shaky. "I let her control things, and I lost sight of what really mattered. Would come in time. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but it was something I had to give myself, not for him, but for me. I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Wade," I said softly. "But I need time. I need space to heal. And you need to prove that you're ready to be a son to me again." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." As he stood to leave, I watched him walk out the door. The conversation had been a start, but it was only the beginning. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew that I was stronger than I had ever been. I had taken the first step toward healing, and I wasn't going to stop now. I woke up the next morning feeling the weight of yesterday's conversation still hanging over me. Wade's words echoed in my mind, but they didn't bring me the comfort I thought they would. I was still processing everything, still trying to decide if I could trust him again, if I could believe in the sincerity of his apology. It wasn't that I wanted to shut him out. Everyone else first. I deserved more than that. I was starting to see that I could still have a life of my own, a life that wasn't dependent on the approval or love of anyone else. I could still be a mother, but I could also be my own person, with my own needs and desires. It wasn't easy, but I was starting to believe that I could have both. The next time I saw Wade, I would be different. I would still love him, but I wouldn't allow myself to be his doormat. I wouldn't allow him to take me for granted again. I was learning that setting boundaries didn't make me a bad person. It didn't mean I loved him any less. It just meant that I was learning to love myself first. That was the lesson I had to learn, the lesson that had been so hard for me to grasp. I had spent my whole life being the one who gave, who sacrificed, but now it was time to stand up for myself. It was time to stop giving so much of myself away. I was still figuring out how to balance love and self-respect, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let myself be disrespected again. I deserved better. I deserved more. And I was going to make sure I got it. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew it would be worth it. And that was enough to keep moving forward. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside my window, a reminder that life continued despite everything that had happened. It was a quiet morning, the kind I had learned to appreciate in the months since sanctuary now, not just a place where I had been ignored or taken for granted. It was my place to heal, to grow, and to rediscover who I was. I thought about my son. I thought about the apology he had offered, how sincere it had seemed. But I also thought about the pain, the years of silence, the way he had allowed his wife to control his every move. I realized that forgiveness didn't mean going back to the way things were. It didn't mean pretending that nothing had happened. It meant accepting the truth of the situation, acknowledging the hurt, and choosing to move forward with my own life, regardless of what happened with him. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it on my own terms. I didn't need his approval anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I needed peace. I needed to feel like I mattered, like I was worthy of happiness. I wasn't going to spend another day waiting for someone to tell me that I was enough. I was going to show myself that I was. As the weeks went on, I started making plans for the future. I began looking for a small apartment, a place of my own where I could truly begin again. I found myself looking forward to things I hadn't thought about in years, taking walks, spending time with friends, and even starting new hobbies. It was liberating, this new sense of independence. My relationship with my son remained distant, but I had stopped letting it define me. I wasn't going to chase after someone who didn't want to be found. If he wanted to be a part of my life, he knew where to find me. But I wasn't going to beg for that anymore. Afraid. I had survived the pain, the betrayal, and the silence. And now, I was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that I had the power to shape my own future.